You've been waiting for the right time, waiting for motivation to show up, waiting for confidence to magically kick in, waiting for life to finally feel easy enough for you to start. But let's be honest with yourself for a moment. That version of a perfect timing you've been chasing, it doesn't exist. What exists is this moment, right here, right now. And the only real question is whether you're going to keep hesitating or finally start moving even while you feel uncertain. Because confidence is not what comes before action. It is what gets built because of action. You don't wake up one day and suddenly feel ready for everything you were scared of yesterday. That's not how people change. That's not how anyone grows. Every strong version of you you've ever admired, every person you think has it figured out, they all start in the same place you are right now. Doubt, fear, confusion, and a voice in their head saying, what if I'm not enough? The difference is they didn't let that voice decide for them. But doubt was never a stop sign. It's just knowing. It's your mind trying to protect you from discomfort, from failure, from embarrassment. But growth doesn't live inside comfort, and neither does your future. You keep thinking you need to feel ready first, but readiness is not a feeling, it's a decision. At some point, you have to choose yourself even when you don't fully believe in yourself yet. That's the real turning point. Not when everything becomes easy, not when fear disappears, but when you decide, I'm going to try anyway. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to take the next step, then another, because clarity doesn't come from thinking, it comes from doing. And the longer you wait, the more you reinforce the idea that you're someone who hesitates instead of someone who acts, but that is not who you are. You are someone who learns, someone who adapts, someone who has already survived more than you give yourself credit for. Think about it. Every difficult day you thought you wouldn't get through, you did. Every moment you thought would break you, did it. Every time you felt like quitting but didn't. Those moments built something inside you. You are already stronger than your doubt gives you credit for. But strength that is never used starts to feel like weakness. That's why you feel stuck. Not because you are incapable, but because you've been standing at the edge of your own potential, overthinking instead of stepping forward. And the truth is simple. Nothing changes until you move. Not your mindset, not your confidence, not your life. Everything starts shifting the moment you stop waiting for permission and start trusting yourself enough to try. Even if you fail, even if it's messy, even if it's not perfect. Because failure is not the opposite of progress, it's part of it. Every mistake teaches you something that comfort never could. So stop asking, what if I fail? Start asking, what if I finally succeed because I didn't give up this time? There is a version of you that already made it further than you are right now. That version didn't have different abilities. They just made different decisions. They didn't wait for fear to disappear. They moved with fear still present. And slowly, fear lost its power. That's what happens when you stop negotiating with your doubts. So today, you don't need a complete transformation. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need to feel 100% ready. You just need to begin. Small, imperfect, honest effort. Because once you start, something shifts inside you. You stop being someone who only thinks about change and start becoming someone who is actually living it. And from that point forward, everything becomes possible in a way it wasn't before. Not because the world changed, but because you did. So if you've been waiting for a sign, this is it. Stop doubting your ability to grow. Stop delaying the life you know you want. Stop waiting for a version of yourself that feels imaginary. You are already here. You are already capable more than you've been using. Now, it's just about choosing it. Not tomorrow, not someday, this time. Waiting for the perfect timing is one of the most common ways people delay their own growth without even realizing it. It feels reasonable on the surface, almost responsible. You tell yourself you are being careful, strategic, or patient. You convince yourself that once the circumstances are right, once life is less busy, once your confidence increases, or once you feel fully prepared, then you will finally begin. But that moment you are waiting for keeps moving further away because it was never a real destination in the first place. It was a mental excuse disguised as logic. The truth is that life rarely aligns itself into perfect conditions for anyone. There will always be something slightly off, something uncertain, or something uncomfortable. If you keep waiting for everything settled before you act, you will end up waiting indefinitely. The idea of a perfect timing creates a false standard that reality cannot meet. And because it cannot be met, it becomes a silent justification for inaction. What people often misunderstand is that progress is not built in ideal situations. It is built in imperfect, messy, and uncertain moments. The early steps of anything meaningful rarely feel smooth or confident. They usually feel awkward, clumsy, and even doubtful. That discomfort is not a sign that you are not ready. It is a sign that you are stepping into something new. Growth always begins slightly outside your comfort zone, not inside a perfectly arranged plan. When you wait for perfect timing, you also unintentionally train your mind to believe that action requires ideal conditions. Over time, this weakens your ability to take initiative. You start to depend on external circumstances instead of trusting your own ability to adapt. But successful progress in any area of life rarely comes from controlling every condition. It comes from learning how to move forward despite conditions that are less than ideal. The people who eventually achieve meaningful change are not the ones who waited the longest for readiness. They are the ones who started even when they felt uncertain. They began with limited knowledge, incomplete preparation, and imperfect confidence. And through action, they refined themselves. Every step they took taught them something they could not have learned by waiting. Action creates clarity in a way that thinking never can. There is also a hidden cost to waiting. While you delay, life continues moving forward. Time does not pause to accommodate hesitation. Opportunities pass, skills remain undeveloped, and potential stays unused. The longer you postpone action, the heavier the idea of starting becomes in your mind. What once felt simple begins to feel overwhelming, not because it actually became harder, but because you accumulated more mental pressure over time. Starting early, even imperfectly, prevents this buildup of pressure. It allows you to grow gradually instead of forcing yourself to meet a standard that doesn't exist yet. Each small attempt builds familiarity. Each effort reduces fear. And each experience adds confidence that cannot be gained through planning alone. Another important realization is that readiness is not something you discover. It is something you develop. You do not suddenly wake up one day fully prepared for challenges you have never faced. Readiness is formed through exposure, repetition, and learning from mistakes. You become ready by doing, not by waiting to feel ready. When you take action without perfect timing, you also reclaim control over your direction. Instead of reacting to circumstances, you begin shaping them. Instead of waiting for permission from life, you start participating in it actively. This shift transforms your mindset from passive observation to active creation. Even the smallest action taken today is more powerful than the most detailed plan left unexecuted. A small, imperfect step contains momentum, and momentum is what eventually turns hesitation into progress. Once you begin moving, even slightly, it becomes easier to continue. The hardest part is never the journey itself. It is the decision to begin. So the idea that you must wait for perfect timing is not protecting you. It is limiting you. It creates an illusion of safety while quietly keeping you stuck in the same place. But nothing meaningful in life is ever unlocked through waiting. It is unlocked through movement, experimentation, and the willingness to start before everything feels right. The moment you accept that imperfection is part of progress, you free yourself from unnecessary delay. You realize that you do not need everything aligned. You only need the courage to begin where you are, with what you have, right now. Confidence is often misunderstood as something people either have or do not have, as if it is a fixed trait that some are born with and others are missing. In reality, confidence is not a starting point. It is a result. It does not appear before action. It grows because of action. When people believe they need to feel confident first before they can begin something, they place themselves in a cycle that keeps confidence out of reach. The more they wait to feel ready, the more distant readiness becomes. This happens because confidence is not built in thought alone. It is built through experience, repetition, and exposure to situations that once felt uncertain. Every time a person takes action despite hesitation, something important begins to change internally. At first, the action may feel uncomfortable or forced. There may be doubt, fear of failure, or concern about judgment. But once the action is taken, even in a small way, the mind starts collecting evidence. It notices that the situation was not as overwhelming as expected, or that the outcome was manageable, even if it was not perfect. This evidence becomes the foundation of confidence. It is not created by imagining success, but by surviving attempts and realizing that effort is possible. Confidence grows in layers, not in sudden leaps. The first attempt is usually the hardest because there is no reference point. But after the first step, the second becomes slightly easier. The third becomes more familiar. Over time, what once felt intimidating becomes routine. This transformation is not magical. It is mechanical. The brain adapts based on repeated exposure. When you repeatedly act in situations that once triggered doubt, your nervous system begins to reclassify those situations as safe or manageable. That is how confidence is trained into existence. Waiting for confidence before acting reverses this natural process. It assumes that belief must come first and experience second. But life works in the opposite direction. Experience produces belief. Action produces certainty. Even people who appear naturally confident were not born with complete assurance in every situation. They developed it by doing things before they felt fully ready and learning from each outcome. Over time, their repeated actions created a mental archive of proof that they could handle challenges. One of the most important realizations is that confidence is not the absence of fear. It is the ability to move forward while fear still exists. Many people think confident individuals feel no doubt, but that is not accurate. Confident individuals simply do not allow doubt to dictate their action. They acknowledge uncertainty, but they do not obey it. This distinction is powerful because it shifts confidence from something emotional to something behavioral. Confident individuals experience doubt frequently, but they interpret it differently. Instead of seeing doubt as a command to stop, they see it as background noise. They recognize that the presence of doubt does not determine the correctness of an action. They understand that hesitation is not proof of inability. It is simply a reflection of unfamiliarity. Doubt often arises at the boundary of growth. When you are inside your comfort zone, there's little uncertainty, so doubt remains quiet. But the moment you attempt something new, doubt becomes louder. This is not because you are incapable, but because you are entering territory that your mind has not yet mapped. The unfamiliar naturally triggers resistance. However, unfamiliarity is also where learning and progress exist. If you always avoid doubt, you will also avoid growth. Another important aspect is that doubt is not stable. It changes over time depending on experience. Something that feels doubtful today may feel obvious tomorrow after enough exposure. This shows that doubt is not a measure of truth, but a temporary emotional state. When you act despite doubt, you collect real evidence that replaces uncertainty. Each successful attempt reduces the intensity of doubt in similar situations in the future. The real danger of doubt is not that it exists, but that it is obeyed without question. When doubt becomes the decision maker, it creates a pattern of avoidance. Each time you listen to it without testing it, you reinforce the belief that it is trustworthy. Over time, this weakens your willingness to act. You begin to depend on certainty before moving forward, even though certainty rarely arrives in advance. Breaking this pattern requires a shift in interpretation. Instead of asking whether doubt is present, the more useful question is whether doubt is based on experience or imagination. Most doubt comes from imagined outcomes rather than actual evidence. It projects failure scenarios that have not occurred and may never occur. When examined closely, many doubtful thoughts lose their authority because they are not grounded in reality. Action is the most effective way to weaken doubt. When you move forward despite uncertainty, you challenge the assumptions that created the doubt in the first place. Even small actions provide feedback that reshapes perception. What once felt uncertain becomes clear through direct experience. Over time, this repeated process trains the mind to rely less on speculation and more on evidence. It is also important to understand that doubt does not disappear completely, even with experience. Instead, it loses control. It becomes a background presence rather than decision-making force. This is a healthier relationship with doubt. not elimination, but detachment. You acknowledge its presence without allowing it to dictate your direction. Doubt often pretends to be wisdom, but wisdom is rooted in experience, not hesitation. Real understanding comes from engaging with challenges, not avoiding them. If doubt is always obeyed, it prevents the very experiences needed to overcome it. This creates a cycle where fear sustains itself by blocking exposure to truth. Ultimately, doubt is a signal of unfamiliarity, not a verdict on ability. It appears whenever you approach something meaningful, because meaningful things require you to step beyond what you already know. The key is not to eliminate doubt before acting, but to act while it is still present and allow experience to redefine it. Growth does not begin in moments of certainty, comfort, or emotional readiness. It begins in moments where you move despite not feeling fully prepared. Most people assume that growth requires a clear mindset, strong motivation, or a complete understanding of what they are doing. Because of this belief, they delay action until they feel internally aligned. But real growth rarely starts with alignment. It starts with discomfort, hesitation, and incomplete understanding. The early stage of any meaningful change often feels unstable. You are not yet skilled, not yet confident, and not yet familiar with the process. This stage is uncomfortable because the mind naturally prefers predictability. When something is new, the brain does not have enough reference points to create a sense of control. This lack of familiarity is what creates resistance. However, resistance is not a sign that you should stop. It is a sign that you are entering a phase of development. Growth requires exposure to situations that challenge your current level of thinking and behavior. If you only operate within what already feels comfortable, there is no expansion. Comfort maintains stability, but it does not create improvement. The boundary between who you are now and who you can become is crossed through action taken in uncertainty. Each time you act without complete confidence, you expand your capacity slightly beyond its previous limit. One of the most important truths about growth is that it is not a sudden transformation. It is a gradual process of adjustment. Every attempt you make, even if imperfect, contributes to internal development. You learn what works and what does not. You refine your approach. You become more familiar with the challenges involved. Over time, this repetition turns confusion into clarity. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable through experience. Many people misinterpret discomfort as a signal of failure. When something feels difficult, they assume it means they are not suited for it. But discomfort is not evidence of incapability. It is evidence of expansion. Anything that stretches your current abilities will naturally feel uneasy at first. If you avoid discomfort entirely, you will also avoid the conditions required for improvement. Growth also requires persistence through the early phase of inefficiency. At the beginning, you will not perform well. Mistakes are frequent, progress feels slow, and results may not reflect your effort immediately. This stage tests patience more than ability. Those who continue, despite early inefficiency, eventually reach a point where their actions become more effective. Those who stop early never reach this stage, not because they lack talent, but because they stopped before adaptation occurred. Another key aspect of growth is feedback. Action provides feedback that thinking alone cannot produce. When you take steps forward, you receive real information about your strengths, weaknesses, and patterns. This feedback is essential because it guides adjustment. Without action, you remain in speculation. With action, you enter learning. Growth depends on this transition from imagination to experience. It is also important to recognize that growth is often invisible in the beginning. Early progress does not always feel significant. Small improvements are easy to overlook because they do not produce dramatic change immediately. However, these small improvements accumulate over time. What seems minor in the short term becomes substantial in the long term. The mistake many people make is expecting immediate visible transformation. And when it does not appear, they assume nothing is happening. In reality, foundational changes are often happening beneath the surface. Growth also reshapes identity gradually. Each action you take reinforces a version of yourself. When you consistently act with effort, you begin to see yourself as someone who tries. When you consistently avoid action, you begin to see yourself as someone who hesitates. Identity is not formed by thoughts alone, but by repeated behavior. This means every attempt you make contributes to the kind of person you are becoming. Another essential element of growth is adaptability. As you engage with challenges, you learn to adjust your approach. What did not work initially becomes clearer with repetition. You start noticing patterns, developing strategies, and refining your judgment. This adaptability is what transforms effort into skill over time. Ultimately, growth is not a comfortable process, nor is it meant to be. It requires stepping into unfamiliar situations, accepting early mistakes, and continuing despite not having full clarity. The discomfort you feel during this process is not a barrier. It is the signal that change is occurring. If you remain willing to act within that discomfort, even without certainty, you gradually transform both your abilities and your understanding of yourself. Small actions often appear insignificant when viewed in isolation, but they are the foundation of every meaningful transformation. Most people underestimate them because they expect change to come from large, dramatic efforts. They imagine that progress requires a single bold decision or an overwhelming burst of motivation. However, real and lasting change is rarely the result of one major event. It is the outcome of consistent, repeated, and often simple actions that accumulate over time. At the beginning of any journey, large goals can feel intimidating. The distance between where you are and where you want to be seems too wide to cross. This is where small actions become essential. They reduce resistance by making progress feel manageable. Instead of focusing on the entire path, you focus on the next step. This shift in perspective is powerful because it removes the pressure of needing to solve everything at once. Small actions also help bypass mental resistance. When a task feels too big, the mind tends to delay or avoid it. But when the task is broken down into smaller parts, it becomes easier to begin. Starting is often the hardest part of any process, and small actions make starting more accessible. Once you begin, even in a limited way, momentum starts to build naturally. That momentum is what carries you forward. Another important aspect of small actions is that they create consistency. Consistency is far more valuable than intensity when it comes to long-term growth. A single intense effort may create temporary change, but consistent small efforts reshape habits and identity. When you repeatedly take small steps in a particular direction, you gradually align your behavior with that direction. Over time, this repetition becomes automatic, and what once required effort becomes part of your routine. Small actions also reduce fear. Fear often grows when a task feels overwhelming or uncertain. By focusing on smaller steps, you reduce the emotional weight attached to the task. Instead of confronting a large, undefined challenge, you deal with something manageable and specific. This reduces anxiety and allows you to act with greater clarity. As you complete small steps, confidence slowly builds because you are proving to yourself that progress is possible. One of the most powerful effects of small actions is that they create evidence. Each action, no matter how minor, provides proof that you are capable of moving forward. This evidence accumulates over time and gradually changes your self-perception. At first, you may doubt your ability to achieve something, but repeated small successes begin to challenge that doubt. You start to see yourself as someone who takes action rather than someone who remains stuck in thought. Small actions also improve decision-making. When you focus on the next immediate step instead of the entire outcome, you reduce confusion. Large goals often create uncertainty because there are too many unknown variables. But small actions simplify the process. They allow you to focus on what is directly in front of you. This clarity makes it easier to adjust, learn, and refine your approach as you go. Another important benefit is that small actions reduce the impact of failure. When you take large, high-pressure actions, failure can feel overwhelming. On the other hand, inconsistency slows progress and creates confusion in direction. Without consistent action, the future remains vague and undefined. Your present decisions also influence your self-perception. When you repeatedly choose discipline, effort, and action, you begin to see yourself as someone who follows through. When you repeatedly choose hesitation, avoidance, or delay, you begin to see yourself as someone who struggles with action. This internal identity then influences future behavior. In this way, your actions and identity continuously reinforce each other. The future version of you is also shaped by how you respond to discomfort. Growth often requires doing things that feel unfamiliar or challenging. When you avoid discomfort, you limit your development. When you move through discomfort, you expand your capability. Each time you face something difficult and choose to continue, you strengthen your ability to handle more complex challenges in the future. This is how resilience is built over time. It is also important to understand that the future is not fixed. It is flexible and responsive to your present actions. Many people assume their future is already determined by current circumstances, but circumstances only set the starting point, not the final. What determines the direction of your future is how you respond to those circumstances. This means change is always possible, regardless of where you begin. Every decision you make either reinforces your current habits or creates new ones. Habits are the foundation of long-term outcomes. Once a habit is formed, it becomes automatic and requires less effort to maintain. This is why present decisions are so powerful. They either strengthen existing patterns or initiate new ones that shape future behavior. Another key aspect is awareness. When you become conscious of how your present actions influence your future, you begin to make more intentional choices. Instead of acting on impulse or short-term comfort, you start considering long-term impact. This shift in thinking allows you to align daily behavior with future goals more effectively. It is also important to recognize that the future version of you is not distant or separate. It is already in formation within your current actions. Every effort you make, every habit you build, and every challenge you face contributes to that evolving version. There is no sudden transformation point where everything changes instantly. Instead, there's a continuous process of becoming. Even moments that seem unproductive are part of this process if you learn from them. Mistakes, delays, and setbacks all contribute to understanding what needs to change. They provide feedback that helps refine your direction. In this sense, even failures in the present can support future growth if they are used as learning experiences. Ultimately, the future version of you is a reflection of the choices you consistently make today. It is not shaped by luck or external conditions alone, but by repeated action, discipline, and awareness. Every decision matters because each one contributes to the direction you are moving in. When you understand this, the present moment becomes powerful. The present is the only place where the future is actually being created. In the end, everything comes down to what you choose to do right now. Not someday, not when things feel easier, and not when fear disappears, but in this very moment. Your future is not waiting for a perfect version of you to show up. It is being shaped by the imperfect version of you that already exists today. Every thought you act on, every habit you repeat, and every decision you make is quietly building the direction of your life. Nothing changes in one sudden leap, but everything changes through consistent choices that slowly reshape who you are becoming. If you learn to trust small actions, embrace uncertainty, and move forward even when it feels uncomfortable, you begin to take control of that direction. Over time, these choices compound into something powerful, turning hesitation into confidence and potential into reality. The future you want is not separate from you. It is being created by you, one decision at a time.